What are we
Okay,
doing?
let's check in with Ukraine and Russia.
Oh, that's right. Ukraine, Russia.
Russia.
Fight for Ukraine. New world order.
Armageddon's on the way.
Okay, so I've got this actually highlighted out here, Gons, and just so we don't fall too far behind, there was an interesting set of articles that are coming out when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, some of the language being thrown around between the two of them, and also from the U.S. Side of things. Let me start out here. This is the Bloomberg. Let me grab my highlighted version. Hopefully it's still highlighted because it does like to mess with me a little bit. Your evening briefing. Is that the correct one? Biden warns Putin over radioactive false flags.
Oh, catch me up. Catch me up to everything.
Get caught up, it says. So this is interesting. For those who might be maybe newer to the show and maybe new to, media analysis and deconstruction. And, if you've been in sort of the fringy truth world for a while, this phrase false flag you'll be very familiar with, especially in the context of some other current events like Alex Jones getting sued for the Sandy Hook thing, calling it a false flag. False flag was this very conspiratorial term for decades and was never even recognized by any, official outlets, official sources, official news outlets, or politicians, or anybody. But it was only a few months ago. I can tell you exactly when it was. It was February of 2022 is when we started hearing official government briefings, including Biden from the pulpit, talking about false flags, suddenly using this term that was relegated to conspiracy theorists. Indeed, even mainstream news outlets commented on hey, this false flag term used to be just a crazy tinfoil hat term, and now Biden is using it from, the podium. But here we go. So we're kind of going back to this. Biden warns Putin over radioactive false flags. And the story itself is not the most important, but let's get just a quick little touch of it. U.S. President Joe Biden warned the Kremlin Tuesday against using any radioactive weapons in its war on Ukraine as tensions over a potential nuclear escalation by Moscow climb. Since before its invasion in February, Russia has been accused of trying to muddy the waters by accusing Kyiv of planned provocations. That's an interesting set of accusations there. Russia has been accused of trying to muddy the water. They've been accused of accusing Kyiv of planned provocations. Unsubstantiated claims that would ostensibly provide cover for Russian false flag operations. Now they do put false flag in quotes right there.
Yeah. So how are they defining false flag here? Just to clarify.
Do they define it in
not,
here?
Not exactly. I'm saying
reading.
When they use the phrase in parentheses and just mentioning it here.
They sort of define it earlier as planned provocations.
Right.
But let's see what else they say. 8 months later, widely rejected allegations by Vladimir Putin's adjutants that Ukraine plans a radioactive dirty bomb attack on its own soil have the U.S. and NATO wondering whether Putin is planning to detonate one himself.
That would be a false flag.
Exactly. So they are giving the definition of the false flag as accusing someone else of what we did ourselves or what they did ourselves, which is a fascinating time for this article to come up because especially relevant to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion. Some might consider that a false flag, blaming it on your enemy, but, doing it yourself. And that's been sort of the honestly hilarity of the whole situation is the U.S. blaming Russia of claiming false flags while, infamously committing false flags ourselves. But the joy of pointing this out has sort of started to weaken. recently because of its obviousness.
Yeah.
With Russia losing significant ground in the northeast and southeast of Ukraine in recent weeks, assessments that Putin may be considering a nuclear attack on Ukraine are growing in the West. Others contend this dirty bomb brinksmanship is the latest Kremlin effort to scare off NATO when it comes to advanced military aid in Ukraine. But Kyiv authorities claimed Tuesday they've seen suspicious activity by Russian forces at Ukraine's occupied nuclear power plant that could indicate the gambit is real.
That could indicate. Wow. Really stretch.
Such games of chicken have been wargamed for decades, and they have always had the capacity to spiral out of control. Yes, indeed. So the funny part is, so Russia having occupation of Ukraine's nuclear facility and Ukraine saying that the Russians are acting suspicious is giving the impression that the Russians needed nuclear material from Ukraine's nuclear plant in order to commit a false flag, which is sort of a strange, complex, sort of circuitous route to try to justify the fear that, Russia might be planning a false flag. Because Russia has its own nuclear stuff. Like, they don't need Ukrainian nuclear material. But alas, that is kind of the one piece of justification that's being given. What do you think?
Yeah. So, with the idea of a false flag, it's always complicated. I almost have to map out exactly what's taking place.
You do. And it's part of the fun of it. It's like this whole false flag thing. Who benefits? Why would who do what for when? It's a real tongue teaser.
And it's hard to explain the way the threads connect per se. But, at the beginning of the article here, it's basically saying that Putin's going to set off a bomb in Russia and blame it on Ukraine. That's one form.
Right.
And then with this, it says that sentence, with Russia losing significant ground in the northeast and southeast of Ukraine in recent weeks, assessment that Putin may be considering a nuclear attack on Ukraine are growing in the West. Isn't that part of the false flag from the West?
Right.
To blame Putin.
Well, that's it's part of the false flag that they don't really mention here. An essential aspect of false flagging is the narrative built around it.
Yeah. But if everyone's accusing everyone of false flagging, then it's kind of a pointless. It confuses the general public, for one. I think that's meant to do that for sure.
And exactly. Yeah. We've talked about this back when Biden brought up the term false flag. Yeah. It had become so popular, and questioning the official story had become so prevalent within the United States, populace, that they finally they grafted the language in and sort of used it as a confusing factor themselves. Right. It really is a very strong propagandistic technique, especially when people know what false flag means. You start using the language of the skeptics, and it becomes much more of an available route for propaganda. And that's what we're seeing here.
Right. So even I was going to say, are you done with this part?
Yeah, I was going to move on to this next one as an example.
From the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one.
Build back better. Blah, blah, blah.
We will build Babylon better. This time,
a new world order.
So Biden uses false flag.
That's right.
What does...
And usnews.com has a headline. U.S. military dismisses Russia as acute threat as Putin boasts of new world order.
Okay.
And it starts out, the whole first half of this thing is a discussion about different officials in the U.S. talking about whether Russia is an acute threat, meaning, they can, for instance, drop a bomb or cause damage to us. Right. Cause damage to us in acute sense, in one swoop, one action, cause damage, versus China, which is more of a long-term threat, more of a chronic threat of China.
Yeah, an economic
than an
versus
acute threat.
Yeah, economic versus some kind of physical altercation.
Yeah,
well.
And the categories are a little less important, but just a tomorrow threat or a 100 years threat kind of difference. Sure. And it's kind of a boring article. But they do get into this in the second half, and let me share it with you now. I'm going to start right under that fun little image of Putin in a car vehicle, with the Conquer
sticker,
bumper sticker,
and the coexist. The opposite version of the coexist.
It's kind of a remake of coexist, except for it says Conquer.
Right.
Indeed, while Austin was speaking from the podium at the Pentagon, Putin himself was giving a sweeping, densely detailed Soviet-style address from the Valdai International Discussion Club, a Moscow-based foreign policy forum. He made dramatic claims about the grandeur that he says accompanies the Kremlin's mission in the former Soviet state, meaning Ukraine. Quote, "We are standing on the I'll do the accent. We are standing on the political, this is not even the right word. We are standing on a historical frontier," Putin said, describing what he considers the beginning of probably the most dangerous, unpredictable, and at the same time important decade since the end of World War II. He described Russia's mission in Ukraine, which he claims centers on defeating a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv that threatens every Russian citizen, as revolutionary to a certain extent, in that it connects with a chain of conflicts that will affect all mankind. So what they're saying is Putin sees this not as a singular war, but as in a chain of historical events.
Yeah. We all saw the butterfly effect. Continue.
Putin claimed he was helping build, quote, "a symphony of human civilization by shaping a new world order in which every system of worldviews would be taken into account." Oh. And it was at this point, Gons, that this language actually started to ring pretty familiar.
Yeah.
The symphony of human civilization, shaping a new world order in which every system of worldviews would be taken into account. Where else have we seen language like this?
Yeah, there's a long time ago, well, she would be old if she was still alive, a lady named Alice Bailey who wrote a bunch of stuff, claimed to channel Deja Kul, the Tibetan, these ascended
Alice
masters.
Bailey, the infamous sort of occult channeler that was influential in a lot of mid-century sort of marriages of the occult and politics.
Right. Yeah. And there's a document, it's hard to find now because there's so many people that have created sort of a separate document based on her 10 steps to a new world order. But in it, she does talk about how...
Wasn't she sort of the original sort of new world order?
She's one of the first.
Maybe didn't necessarily come up with the idea, but is one of the original influencers as far as this new world order idea.
Yeah, and she does talk about an awakening process, and in that process, the nations all being honored, their cultures being honored and preserved. It's not a complete takeover of culture and all this stuff. It's more of a what's the word? An eclectic unity, that kind of thing.
Sort of a symphony of human civilization.
Yeah, well put, Vladimir.
Yeah.
Vlad, nice job. Been reading that Alice Bailey. So, I thought that was it. And also, one of the things, this is something else that I don't hear people talk about all the time. Alice Bailey had a list of the rays and the nations, the rays, like the light, light beam,
Right.
And a list of nations. And it's interesting because there are 11 nations. And when you talk about the, Bible prophecy, you have 10 kings that are all of one mind. And then you have an 11th that comes in and takes over. But the nations are India, China, Germany, France, Great Britain, Italy, USA, Russia, Austria, Spain, and Brazil. So interesting.
Yes, certainly all I think every single one of those playing an important part in what's going on right now.
And India.
I'm not so sure about Austria, but I just don't know much about Austria in general.
Well,
he certainly was important during World War II.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't Hitler from Austria?
Yeah, something like that. Austria was very important during that time. He goes on here. So he gives his little quote, his little Alice Bailey quote, which again is actually kind of unusual for Putin talk, because he's not so much like, hey, everybody work together. Well, he's like, the West is satanic.
Right. Well, I'll say this.
The devil.
I'll say this. Right. So part of Alice Bailey's big thing, I know a lot of people just think that she's, invoking Lucifer, in which she was, but a lot of those occultists in that era, they conflate God, the light of the world, with the counterfeit light. So Alice Bailey's big message was, we're getting ready for the return of Christ. But it wasn't Jesus' return. It was more like, the Christ it was very complicated, right? It was Christ consciousness.
Yeah, it was sort of the occult new agey.
Right. The golden age again and all that kind of stuff. And so
Age of Aquarius was a big
if you're not
thing.
If you're someone like Putin, very busy, he's got to ride his horses, got to, take out people trying to take him out. He may not look into the details, but see that there's, look, Alice Bailey was talking about the return of Christ. And, my people like talking about the return of Christ. So maybe,
or simply a player in a bigger game.
Of course.
Can fully comprehend.
Well, somebody had to hand him the book, right?
The article continues here. It says, he said Russia's conflict is with Western elites, not necessarily the West itself. Employing language similar to that of American conservatives. Oh, there we go. American conservatives and Putin have so much in common again. Yeah. But it is interesting his using that language. His war is with the Western elites, not with the West itself. And of course, we've seen through the past, many years of American politics, conservatives are much more concerned with the class war than it is the ideological war, or at least, certain contingents of conservatives are on the level with that. But it's seen as a bad thing. If you're at war with the elites, if you disagree with the actions of the elites, you're a crazy conservative right-wing Trump supporter. I mean, Trump got most of his, supporters from voicing disdain with the elite circles, not so much ideological or policy problems, but just, draining the swamp, getting rid of the elites, et cetera, et cetera. So they're connecting this to Putin, of course. Yeah. And the former KGB officer likewise cast himself as of the lower classes, not the elites, due to his modest upbringing. Another unsubtle attempt to show sympathy with the 300,000 young men he has forced into military service to support the flagging military campaign in Ukraine, a move that spurred widespread protests and mass flight from Russia. He appeared to downplay the potential employment of nuclear weapons, saying, quote, "We don't need a nuclear strike on Ukraine. There is no point politically or militarily."
Wait, he's just saying that. He's lying, people. He's lying. He's a liar.
Right. Well, you gotta know he is an expert at playing the game. He is an expert at playing the game. He can apparently simultaneously strike fear into the hearts of all of Americans with nuclear threats and give speeches about how, a nuclear strike wouldn't help him politically or militarily. So, with a penchant for quoting Alice Bailey, a lot of we joke about people giving us criticism about carrying water for Putin and stuff like that. Of course, the mainstream makes that an easy joke to make. But in all seriousness, you got to remember, he is not in his position because he's a nice guy or because he's not clued in with the broader sort of spiritual roadmap that's been laid out for the many nations. So he's certainly playing his part and pretty much telling each group exactly what they want to hear. Very impressive.
Yeah.
And confusing the U.S. at the same time.
Yeah. How conservative sounding really is he? You know, like they accuse him of sounding like an American conservative.
Yeah.
But what kind of examples do we have here?
I'm glad you asked, Gons, because the BBC.com headline, Russia to ban sharing LGBT propaganda with adults as well as children.
Oh.
So pretty conservative, Gons. The controversial Russian ban against promoting so-called gay propaganda looks set to be extended to adults. So it's one thing, you know, it's been illegal for a while to, you know, promote gay propaganda to children in Russia. But now it's to adults. Even adults can't
the big children,
talk about it. The big, yeah. In the elite's view, the big children.
Yeah.
The move represents a toughening of an existing 2013 law, which makes providing information about being LGBT. Where's the Q and the plus? BBC.
They're getting lazy.
To children, a criminal offense. Those convicted face large fines for promoting what Russia calls non-traditional sexual relations. The initial approval of the extension was voted through by the Russian State Duma unanimously. Earlier this week, officials had urged politicians in Russia's lower house of parliament to enact the extension, portraying it as part of a broader battle over civilizational values with the West and linking it to decision to invade Ukraine. And it goes on about the details of it, but it includes propaganda of pedophilia, non-traditional lifestyles, rejection of family values. All these sorts of things are kind of lumped up in there. It's seen as a civilizational war against the West.
I find it interesting that the seed of this thing happening was in 2013 in Russia. Because that is the year that in America we had the Smith-Munn Modernization Act. So it's almost like they were planning the split, the fork, you know, of civilization already in that early stage.
Right.
So
yeah, and it was right before Crimea too.
Yeah.
So big things been going on starting right around that time.
Yeah.